I wonder what Asia, Africa, and the Middle East think of the United States and Europe. Attached is a verse from the Coburn Bible, verse 4.8. I see the city on the plain as the West. That does not mean, however, I see the men of the mountain who are supposed to be virtuous as the description of the other side, only what they must be thinking of us. Coburn Bible, chapter 4, GLN, verse 4.2 and 4.3. These verses sounds a lot like the way we live in 2017, and I could point just to the United States, but honestly it sounds more like Europe today. However, the United States is smelling just as bad. GLN 4.2. The people of those times spurned all spiritual things, and men lived only for pleasure, caring little for the good of mankind or the future of the people. Lewdness and lies were upon the tongues of all men, and brother could not deal justly with brother. The princes and governors were corrupt, and proper tribute was not paid. The statutes were held up to scorn. The lives of men were ruled by their desires, and they spent their days in gluttony, drunkenness, fornication, dancing, and singing to instruments of music. GLN 4.3. The land was unattended, for men dissipated their strength in unproductive lusts and pleasures. Women lacked shame, for many would cast their glances after one man. Men fought among themselves, and even slew one another because of their lust for worthless women. While the chaste women were not sought, they were even rejected, for men declined the effort of being worthy of them. In the eyes of their fathers, wives were unhonored, and only the woman of pleasure commanded the attentions of men. Women were unclean and immodest, and men lay with them shamelessly in the presence of one another. Old women were more lustful than the young ones, while virgins were seduced and corrupted in their childhood. Fathers fornicated before their sons, and were admired for their prowess. They made no distinction between their sons and other men, or between their wives and other women. Deceit and violence were seen on every hand. Now in 4.8, this makes me wonder how America and Europe looks to the Middle East. I am not comparing the men of the mountain to the Middle East, but the men of the plain, the opinion and the disgust the men of the mountain felt for them. It is hard not to see Europe and America in the description of the men of the plain. They cared more for luxury than principles. Whether the Middle East sees us in the same light, I cannot say, but I do know it is sadly how I see Europe and American society, and that worries me. How can we expect God to keep protecting us when we won't do it ourselves? This last 5 years, I have lost so much of the swagger of thinking Americans are in some way deserving of the blessings we have received, when in fact at every step of the way we insult them, we treat them as if they're not even important, and in fact as if in some way we're entitled to it. GLN 4.8. The people of the plain bowed before the strength of men of the mountains. They did not fight, for among all their possessions they regarded their lives as the most valuable thing, precious above all else. They said, "Take whatever we have, our riches and harvest, the treasured things from our dwellings, even our daughters for your amusement, but leave us enough that we may live under your shadow." The sturdy men of the mountains were sickened by these half-men who had lived for 3 generations without fighting, and they despised them. What do you think? Understand, I am a conservative, but I do not exclude any group. From the liberal progressives' view of begging forgiveness and excusing all matter of insult directed at us and our friends, or refusing to wisely handle immigration, so those here are encouraged to embrace their new country instead of bringing the division of their old home here. To conservatives who foolishly act that what works here can work everywhere. or push our version of morality on other places. By the way, liberals do the same thing. In our own border, we have that right and responsibility. Nowhere else. But even if we send troops, it does not give us a right to dictate to them. It cheapens the good deed by acting self righteous and lecturing them on their deficiencies. And while I do not agree in the climate change emergency, I do believe it is reasonable to assume we do have an impact and should attempt to be less intrusive within reason.